Once he covers the cost of my vacation, I'll have him moved into a care facility. The voice belonged to my son-in-law, and I overheard it because he hadn't disconnected our phone call. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow, and I immediately panicked. I had, in fact, just paid for his one-way ticket. But my decision to freeze his credit cards is why I'm so grateful to have you here now. Please follow my story to its conclusion and leave a comment with the city you're from. I'm curious to see how far this tale has traveled. The impact of those words felt like a punch to my chest. I was standing in my kitchen, still holding the cordless phone that had been ringing just moments earlier. Stephen had called to ask about a trivial detail concerning his upcoming trip to Europe, the very trip I had been so delighted to finance. He had framed it as a second honeymoon with my daughter Amelia, something he claimed they desperately needed to rekindle their connection after 15 years together. I had been overjoyed to help them. At 72, what purpose did my money serve, if not to bring happiness to my family? The vacation package was nearly 8-0. But the look of sheer joy on Stephen's face when I made the offer felt like it was worth every last cent. He had embraced me with such warmth that day, calling me the most generous father-in-law on the planet. But he had failed to hang up the phone correctly. The line remained open, and I could hear him speaking to someone else. From the casual, familiar tone, I guessed it was his brother, Kevin. I'm telling you, Kevin, the old man is so incredibly gullible. Stephen's voice crackled through the receiver. He just forked over $8,000, no questions asked. Amelia thinks I should hold off on mentioning the nursing home until we get back. But frankly, I'm growing weary of feigning interest in his repetitive stories and minor ailments. My hands began to shake. My first instinct was to hang up, to grant them their privacy. But a certain coldness in Stephen's voice, a chilling tone I had never detected before, held me captive. The best part, Stephen went on, his laugh making my stomach churn, is that he genuinely believes we're thankful. Does he honestly think we want to spend our holiday thinking about him? This trip is our escape from all that responsibility. Once we're back, refreshed and with a tan, we'll start touring those facilities. I've already shortlisted 3 decent places that accept government aid. I collapsed into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. Government aid? I was far from destitute. I had substantial savings, a portfolio of investments, and a house that was fully paid for. Why on earth would Stephen be looking into subsidized facilities unless he intended to seize every asset I possessed first? The timing couldn't be more perfect, Stephen continued. He's been having more of those senior moments lately, misplacing his keys, telling the same stories over and over. It won't be hard to persuade everyone that he requires professional supervision. Amelia is already on board. She's tired of him calling every day, wanting to come over for dinner, needing assistance with small tasks. She agrees it's time he had around-the-clock care. Those senior moments, Stephen mentioned, were not signs of cognitive decline. They were symptoms of profound loneliness. I misplaced my keys because I was lost in thought about the oppressive silence of my home. I repeated stories because I was starved for conversation, for any human connection. I called them daily because, since my wife Helen passed away 5 years ago, they were the only family I had left. I figure we'll give it a month after we return, Stephen elaborated. We'll let him feel needed one last time by fabricating some emergency. Maybe we'll say Amelia needs an expensive medical procedure or something. We can get him to sign over power of attorney, you know, for his own protection. Then, bam, he's settled into a nice facility where trained professionals can give him better care than we ever could. The sarcasm with which he said, trained professionals, was unmistakable. He wasn't concerned about my welfare. He was plotting to get me out of the picture while maintaining control over my finances. The house alone is probably worth 300 grand, Stephen mused. Plus, whatever he has tucked away in savings and stocks. Amelia estimates it's probably close to $500,000 in total. Not a bad haul for enduring an old man's neediness for a few more weeks. $500,000. They had appraised my life's worth, as if I were already gone. A tightness constricted my chest, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I was having a heart attack. The shock, the betrayal, the utter devastation, it was all too much. But then, hearing Stephen's voice again, something else began to rise within me. Something harder and colder than pain. I just have to continue playing the part of the devoted son-in-law until the trip is over, Stephen said. I'll smile when he shows me Amelia's baby pictures for the 100th time. I'll feign interest in his garden and his men's club anecdotes. I'll act grateful for his generous gift. God, if he only knew how much I resent having to perform this charade for money that should have been ours years ago. Money that should have been theirs. I had worked for 40 years, diligently saved, and sacrificed so I could leave a legacy for Amelia. But it seemed they felt entitled to it now, while I was still living and fully capable of making my own choices. The funniest part is, he'll probably end up thanking us for putting him somewhere safe. Stephen laughed again. He's so desperate for our approval, he'll convince himself we're doing it out of love. We won't even have to feel guilty, because he'll be grateful. That laugh, so cruel, so calculating, shattered the spell that had held me frozen. With trembling hands, I finally hung up the phone. I sat in my kitchen as the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows Helen and I had installed when we bought this house 35 years ago. The silence in the room felt different now. Before, it had been lonely. Now, it felt menacing. I was alone, with no one to shield me from the very people who viewed me as a bank account with an inconvenient old man attached. I replayed countless moments in my mind. Stephen complimenting my grilling, asking for my barbecue sauce recipe, bringing the children over to visit their grandfather. Had it all been an act? Was every embrace, every "I love you too, Dad Arthur," every appreciative smile just a carefully calculated move in a long game of manipulation? My hands were still unsteady as I reached for my briefcase and pulled out my checkbook. There it was, in my own script. The check I had written just 2 days prior, for 8-0, payable to exotic European vacations. I had been so proud to give them this experience, so happy to witness Stephen's excitement. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I had just bankrolled their celebratory getaway, the vacation they would take, right before locking me away like a piece of forgotten furniture. But as I sat there, staring at the checkbook, a profound shift occurred within me. The shock began to recede, replaced by a sharp clarity I hadn't felt in years. Stephen and Amelia thought they were so clever, orchestrating my life behind my back, assessing my worth, and deciding my fate. They had no inkling of who they were truly up against. I might be 72, but I was not powerless. I was not addled. And I certainly would not be ushered quietly into any facility of their choosing. I walked into my study and opened the old mahogany desk where Helen used to keep her important documents. Tucked away in the back, behind my grandfather's antique watch, was a 5-year-old business card. But it was still good. Martin Hayes, estate attorney. He had managed Helen's will and had instructed me to call him if I ever required his services. It was time to make that call. Stephen wanted to play games with my life and my money. So be it. But he was about to discover that this particular game had a set of rules he knew nothing about, and I was a far more skilled player than he could ever imagine. The phone felt solid and steady in my hand as I dialed Martin's number. Stephen and Amelia believed they held all the cards, But they had made one critical error. They had underestimated me. Martin Hayes agreed to meet with me the very next morning. I could hear the worry in his voice over the phone. "Arthur, you sound distressed. Is everything all right?" I told him I needed to urgently review my estate planning, and he promptly cleared his schedule for 9 a.m. I hardly slept a wink that night. Each time I closed my eyes, I was haunted by the sound of Stephen's laughter, the cruel condescension in his voice as he mocked my senior moments and predicted how grateful I'd be for professional care. I spent the night replaying conversations from the past year, desperately searching for the signs I had missed. How many times had Stephen exchanged a knowing glance with Amelia when I retold a favorite story? How often had they rolled their eyes behind my back when I asked for help with my new computer or wanted to share photos from my fishing trip? I had believed I was sharing my life with them. They had been cataloging evidence of my supposed decline. The most painful part was remembering how diligently I had tried to be the perfect father-in-law. When Amelia brought Stephen home 15 years ago, I was determined not to be one of those overbearing fathers. I gave them their space, respected their choices, and offered support without being intrusive. I truly thought I had built a loving, respectful relationship with Stephen. But lying there in the darkness, memories began to surface with a new, disturbing context. I remembered the time Stephen had admired my late wife's diamond pendant, the one I gave her for our 30th anniversary. "That's stunning, Dad Arthur. It would look so beautiful on Amelia for the vow renewal we're planning." I had taken it from my dresser right then and given it to him, touched that he wanted Amelia to wear something of her mother's for such a special event. But the vow renewal never happened. Stephen and Amelia just kept the necklace, or the time he had marveled at my collection of first edition classic books, which I had been preserving for future generations. "Amelia is so fortunate to come from a family with such incredible heirlooms," he'd said wistfully. "I grew up without anything special like this." A week later, I had insisted he take the entire collection for their home. "You'll appreciate them more than I do," I'd told him. But the books remained untouched on a high shelf, gathering dust like trophies. The pattern was glaringly obvious now that I was willing to see it. Stephen would express admiration for something, make a sorrowful remark about his own modest background, and I would immediately offer it to him. He would protest just enough to make me insist, then accept with a show of overwhelming gratitude. I had felt so good about my own generosity, so happy to provide for my family. Now I saw it for what it was. Calculated exploitation from the very beginning. Martin's office was just as I remembered it from 5 years ago. The same deep blue leather armchairs, the same imposing wall of legal texts, the same atmosphere of quiet competence. But Martin himself looked older, his hair more silver, and when he saw me, his professional smile gave way to genuine concern. "Arthur, you look as if you haven't slept in a week. What's happened?" I had rehearsed my speech, but sitting across from him, the words tumbled out in a torrent. I told him everything. The phone call, Stephen's sinister plans, the nursing home research, the cold appraisal of my net worth. Martin listened intently, taking notes without interruption, his expression growing more somber with every detail I shared. When I finally finished, he set his pen down and leaned back. "Arthur, I have to ask, and please don't be offended. Are you experiencing any cognitive difficulties? Memory lapses, confusion, anything at all that could lend credence to their claims?" The question stung, but I knew it was necessary. "No, I might forget where I left my reading glasses sometimes, but I'm 72, not 92. My memory is sharp. I can recall conversations from 20 years ago verbatim. My physician gave me a full checkup last month and declared me to be in excellent health for my age." Martin nodded. "Good. We'll need to get that documented. But Arthur, what is it you want to do? Confronting them directly could cause them to move up their timeline. I had pondered this all night long. I don't want a confrontation, not yet. I want to protect myself first. I need to ensure they can't get their hands on my money or force me into a home against my will. A wise strategy, Martin said, taking out a fresh legal pad. Let's review your current arrangements. Who holds your power of attorney? No one. Helen and I never thought it was necessary. After she passed, it didn't cross my mind. That's fortunate. And the beneficiaries on your accounts and insurance policies? Amelia is the sole primary beneficiary on everything. I have about 200 in savings, another 150 in investments. The house is worth around 300, and there's a life insurance policy for another 100. Martin jotted down the figures. So roughly 750 total. That's certainly enough to inspire malicious behavior. He looked up at me, his gaze steady. Arthur, I need to ask you something difficult. Do you believe Amelia is aware of Stephen's full plan? This was the question I had been dreading. Amelia was my only child. My little girl who used to run to me when she had a bad dream. The girl who cried when she found an injured bird and brought me wildflowers as if they were precious jewels. But that little girl was now a woman who apparently viewed her own father as a nuisance. He said she was already on board, I whispered. He said she was tired of my calls and my visits. Martin's expression softened with empathy. I'm so sorry, Arthur. That must be utterly devastating. It is, I admitted. But I can't let my grief prevent me from protecting myself. You are absolutely right. Martin retrieved several documents from a filing cabinet. Here's what we're going to do. First, we'll draft an ironclad power of attorney document that requires certification of cognitive decline from 2 independent physicians before it can be activated. Second, we will establish a revocable trust and transfer all your assets into it, with highly specific instructions regarding your care preferences. Third, we will create an advanced healthcare directive that explicitly states your wish not to be placed in a nursing facility unless you are physically incapable of caring for yourself. How long will this process take? If we act quickly, we can have everything finalized within a week. But Arthur, there's another crucial step. If Stephen and Amelia are plotting to have you declared incompetent, they might try to legally challenge these new documents. We need to have recent medical and psychological evaluations on file to definitively prove your mental competency. A wave of anger washed over me as I thought of Stephen's casual dismissal of my senior moments. Can you recommend someone? Dr. Patricia Williams is a leading specialist in geriatric assessments. Her testimony is considered the gold standard in competency hearings. I'll contact her office and see if she can see you this week. As Martin detailed the strategy, I felt a sense of control that had been absent for months. For too long, I had been passively letting Stephen and Amelia dictate our family life dinners, holidays, even what gifts I should buy for my grandchildren. I had told myself I was being easygoing, but in reality, I had been surrendering my own power piece by piece. There's one more thing, Martin said as he organized the papers. You said they're leaving for this European trip you financed. When do they depart? Next Friday. They'll be gone for 2 weeks. Martin smiled, and for the first time that morning, it wasn't a smile of sympathy. It was a smile of strategy. Perfect. That gives us a clear window to put all these protections in place while they're out of the country. By the time they return, you will be legally fortified in every conceivable way. Walking out of Martin's office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The morning sun seemed more brilliant, and for the first time since Helen's passing, I felt like my old self again. Not the lonely widower, grateful for any scrap of attention. Not the convenient grandfather, a source of endless financial support. But Arthur Williams, a man who had worked for 40 years, raised a daughter, mourned his wife, and was not about to be cast aside like worn-out machinery. Stephen and Amelia thought they were masterminds, charting my future without my consent. They had no idea their supposed victim was about to become their greatest adversary. They wanted to play games with my life. Fine. But they were about to find out I had been playing games for far longer than they had, and I was much better at winning. The following days were a whirlwind of meticulous acting and covert preparations. I had to keep up my normal routine with Stephen and Amelia while quietly erecting a fortress of legal defenses around myself. It was draining but also strangely empowering. Every warm smile I offered Stephen, every thankful word for his feigned kindness, was now a calculated part of my own performance. On Wednesday afternoon, Stephen called to go over some final trip details. "Dad Arthur, are you absolutely certain about covering the travel insurance as well? It's another $300, but Amelia thinks it's a good idea, just to be safe." "Of course, son," I said, my voice dripping with manufactured warmth. "I want you two to have a spectacular time with no worries at all." "You're a saint," Stephen gushed. "I don't know what we'd do without you." "Oh, and I was thinking, maybe you shouldn't be all alone in that big house while we're away. Would you like me to ask my brother Kevin to check in on you? He could even stay over a couple of nights if you feel lonely." A chill went down my spine. Kevin would be Stephen's informant, reporting back on my every move, my visitors, even my mail. "That's very considerate, but I'll be perfectly fine. I have my men's club and my garden to keep me occupied." "Well, if you have a change of heart, just give Kevin a call. I'll make sure he has your number before we go." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, feeling as if I were a character in a spy thriller. Stephen was already arranging for surveillance, likely hoping to collect anecdotes of my confusion or frailty. But two could play at that game. Thursday morning was my appointment with Dr. Patricia Williams. Her office was in a downtown medical tower, the waiting room filled with elderly individuals and their adult children. I observed their interactions closely. Some of the children were genuinely attentive, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. Others were visibly impatient, scrolling through their phones while their parents struggled to answer the doctor's queries. Dr. Williams was a petite, sharp woman with kind eyes behind stylish glasses. She spent a full 2 hours with me, administering memory tests, cognitive exercises, and a detailed review of my medical records. She had me recall lists of items, solve mathematical puzzles, replicate geometric shapes, and answer questions on current affairs. "Mr. Williams," she said when the assessment was complete, "your cognitive function is remarkable for a man of any age, let alone 72. Your memory is acute, your reasoning is sound, and your judgment appears to be unimpaired. I will prepare a comprehensive report to document your full mental competency." "Doctor, may I ask you a question?" I said. "If someone were to try to have me declared incompetent, what would they need to prove?" Her expression turned serious. "They would require substantial medical evidence of significant cognitive decline, documented examples of poor judgment that places you at risk, and corroborating testimony from people who interact with you on a regular basis. Based on my evaluation today, any such claim against you would have to be supported by fabricated evidence." That afternoon, I returned to Martin's office to sign the stack of documents he had prepared. The power of attorney was now ironclad, requiring 2 independent physicians to certify any cognitive decline. The trust shielded my assets from any claims that I was not of sound mind when I created it. The advanced directive articulated my wishes for care in clear, unmistakable terms. Arthur, Martin said as I signed the final page, there's one more thing we need to address. What if they try emotional manipulation, claiming you're hurting Amelia or being cruel to your grandchildren? I had been thinking about this as well. Amelia had 2 children, Leo, who was 16, and Chloe, who was 14. They were good kids, but I saw them so rarely now. Stephen always had an excuse for why they couldn't visit, too busy with school, sports, and friends. The grandkids barely know me anymore, I said with a pang of sadness. Stephen has made sure of that. He's been isolating me from them for years. That's another classic tactic in these situations, Martin confirmed. The manipulator isolates the victim from other family members to become the central relationship. It makes the victim more dependent and grants the manipulator greater control. Friday morning arrived all too quickly. Stephen and Amelia were heading to the airport at noon, and Stephen had insisted on stopping by for coffee first. I want to say a proper goodbye, he'd said. And maybe you could give me that recipe for your spice rub. I'd love to try and replicate it at the hotel. He arrived at 10, looking vibrant and handsome in a new travel outfit. He had clearly spared no expense preparing for this trip. His hair was perfectly styled. He wore a new designer watch, and he was carrying a leather weekender bag that likely cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Dad Arthur, you look great, he said, giving me a firm hug. Are you excited for us? I still can't believe we're finally taking this trip. I'm thrilled for you both, I replied, pouring his coffee into one of my second-best mugs. I had learned my lesson about using my prized possessions around Stephen. I brought you something, he said, pulling a small wrapped box from his bag. I saw this at the department store and thought of you. Inside was a generic-looking tie clip, the kind you might find for $30. I had just spent $8 on their vacation, and he brought me a trinket that cost less than a tank of gas. It's very nice, son. Thank you. I thought you could wear it and think of us while we're away, he said, then leaned in conspiratorially. Amelia is so excited. She's been working so hard, and this trip is exactly what she needs. You know how stressed she gets. I did know. Amelia had always been prone to anxiety, even as a child. But I also knew that much of her recent stress was due to the pressure Stephen put on her to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't possibly afford on her salary alone. Where are you most excited to see? I asked, continuing my performance. Oh, everywhere. Paris, Rome, Barcelona. We booked a wine tour in Tuscany, and Amelia found a cooking class in Lyon. And our hotel in Paris has a spa that looks absolutely incredible. I listened to him prattle on about their itinerary, mentally tallying the costs. The $8 was merely the starting point. They would easily spend another $50 on dining, shopping, and excursions. Money they didn't have, which meant they would return deep in debt, which meant they would need my help again, which was precisely why they wanted me in a nursing home, to gain unrestricted access to my savings without the need for permission or feigned gratitude. I should probably get going, Stephen said at last, glancing at his watch. Amelia gets anxious if we don't get to the airport with plenty of time to spare. But Dad Arthur, I really want you to know how much this means to us. You're the most generous man I know. He hugged me again. I could smell his expensive cologne, see the perfect tailoring of his jacket, feel the smooth fabric of his shirt. Everything about him was polished, refined, and utterly false. Have a wonderful time, I said. Don't worry about a thing back here. Just enjoy yourselves. We will. And when we get back, perhaps we can plan something special for your birthday next month. I was thinking of that nice steakhouse downtown, the one with the live jazz. My birthday. Stephen had forgotten it for the last 3 years in a row, only remembering when Amelia prodded him days later. Now, suddenly, He was planning celebrations because he believed it might be my last birthday as a free man. After he left, I stood at my study window, watching him drive away in the car I had helped them purchase. The house felt different now, not lonely, but serene. For the next 2 weeks, there would be no need for pretense. I wouldn't have to force a smile when Stephen made a subtle jab about my age or my memory. I wouldn't have to listen to Amelia's increasingly impatient sighs when I asked for help with my tablet. I was free to be myself. And more importantly, I was free to defend myself. Martin had provided me with a checklist of tasks to complete during their absence. First, visit my bank and remove Stephen's name from my list of emergency contacts. Second, change the locks on my house, a security measure Martin had strongly advised. Third, meet with my financial advisor to transfer my investments into the newly established trust. But before I did any of that, I wanted to access my safe deposit box. There were documents in there I hadn't seen in years, papers Helen had insisted we keep secure. I had a strong feeling I was going to need every weapon in my arsenal. As I grabbed my wallet and car keys, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked different somehow, more alert, more resolute. The man staring back at me was not a helpless widower waiting to be cast aside. He was a man who had spent 4 decades working, saving, and planning for his future. Stephen and Amelia thought they knew what that future held. They were about to find out just how mistaken they were. The very first thing I did after Stephen and Amelia departed for the airport was drive to my bank. I had been a customer at First National for over 30 years, and the branch manager, Robert Chen, had personally handled my accounts since Helen's death. He knew me well enough to show genuine concern when I requested a private meeting. "Mr. Williams, is everything all right? You seem troubled." I had prepared for this conversation, aware that I needed to be discreet about what I disclosed. "Robert, I need to make some adjustments to my accounts. I want to remove my son-in-law as an emergency contact and as a beneficiary." His eyebrows shot up slightly. "Of course, we can take care of that. May I ask what prompted this change? The last time we spoke, you mentioned how helpful Stephen was with your financial affairs. That was precisely the problem. I had been too trusting, too eager to project the image of a harmonious family. I had portrayed myself as the fortunate father-in-law blessed with a caring and supportive family. Now, I had to dismantle that narrative without revealing the whole sordid story. "I've decided it's time to simplify things," I said carefully, "to keep my financial matters more private." Robert nodded, though I could tell he suspected there was more to it. We spent the next hour updating all my accounts, revoking Stephen's access, and establishing new, stricter security protocols. I also mandated that any inquiries regarding my accounts must be directed to me personally, with no information to be shared with any family members. "Mr. Williams," Robert said as we were finishing up, "I hope you don't mind my saying so, but these changes seem rather abrupt. If you have any concerns about financial abuse or manipulation, the bank has resources that can help." The kindness in his voice nearly brought me to tears. For months, I had felt utterly alone, constantly second-guessing my own perceptions. To have a professional acknowledge the legitimacy of my concerns was more reassuring than I could have imagined. "Thank you, Robert. I'm just taking precautions." My next stop was the locksmith. I hadn't changed the locks since we moved in, but Martin had been adamant. "If they have keys and unrestricted access," he had warned, "they can plant evidence of your decline. They could move things, hide important papers, or even bring people over to witness a manufactured state of confusion." The locksmith, a cheerful man named Dave, arrived that afternoon. As he worked, he spoke about home security, noting an uptick in elder abuse cases where family members exploit their access to manipulate and defraud. The tragic part, Dave said, fitting a new deadbolt, is that most of these seniors never see it coming. They trust their family implicitly, right up until the very end. While Dave was busy with the locks, I surveyed my house with a newfound sense of vigilance. In the guest bedroom, where Stephen and Amelia stayed during their visits, I discovered things that made my blood run cold. Tucked beneath the mattress was a folder filled with printouts from nursing home websites, notes in Stephen's handwriting detailing my assets and their estimated values, and even a business card for an attorney specializing in emergency guardianship petitions. My hands trembled as I read through Stephen's meticulously crafted plan. He had been plotting this for months, perhaps even years. He had calculated not just my financial worth, but also the monthly fees for various care facilities, the projected timeline for selling my house, and the tax implications of my eventual death. One particular note sent a shiver down my spine. A's next doctor apt, mention memory concerns, get official documentation of decline. Stephen had been planning to accompany me to my next checkup, armed with fabricated stories of my forgetfulness, hoping to trick my doctor into documenting cognitive issues that simply didn't exist. I gathered all the documents and placed them in a bag to deliver to Martin. This was irrefutable evidence of premeditation, proof that this was no spur-of-the-moment idea but a carefully orchestrated conspiracy. On Tuesday morning, I met with my financial advisor, Janet Morrison. Like Robert at the bank, Janet had worked with Helen and me for many years. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had built a successful practice serving retirees and widows. Arthur, Martin Hayes called me yesterday to discuss the setup of your new trust. He indicated you were making some significant adjustments to your estate plan. That's correct, I said. I want to move all my investments into the trust and revise my beneficiary designations. Janet pulled up my profile on her monitor. You currently have Amelia listed as the sole primary beneficiary on everything: your IRA, investment accounts, and your life insurance. Are you certain you want to change all of that? I am Zatain. May I ask what brought on this decision? The last time we met, you were discussing strategies to help Amelia and Stephen with their financial goals. I had anticipated this question and had an answer ready. I've come to realize that I need to be more thoughtful about my legacy. I want to ensure my money benefits causes that I deeply care about, rather than just passing it on automatically to family. Janet nodded slowly. That is actually very wise. Many people assume their children will manage an inheritance responsibly, but that is not always the case. We spent the next 2 hours completely restructuring my portfolio. I kept Amelia as a beneficiary, but reduced her share of my estate to just 25%. The remaining 75% was allocated to charities that Helen and I had supported for years: the local animal rescue, the literacy program at the public library, and a fund that helped low-income seniors with medical expenses. Arthur, Janet said as we concluded, I must tell you, this is one of the most considerate and well-thought-out estate plans I have ever seen. You're still providing for your family, while also supporting causes that are clearly meaningful to you. If only she knew the dark reality that had prompted my sudden philanthropic shift. Yet, sitting in her office, making these definitive choices about my legacy, I felt a sense of pride. Stephen and Amelia would still inherit a significant sum, but they would not get everything. And more importantly, they would not get it unconditionally. The trust I had established had strict provisions, requiring them to demonstrate genuine need and financial responsibility before any funds would be disbursed. Wednesday brought an unwelcome surprise. Kevin, Stephen's brother, appeared on my doorstep around noon. I'd been half expecting this. Stephen had mentioned giving him my number, but seeing him on my porch still made my heart pound. "Arthur, I hope I'm not intruding. Stephen asked me to check in on you while they're away." Kevin was younger than Stephen, perhaps in his mid-30s, with the same slick-back hair and a practiced smile. He was holding a casserole dish and wore an expression of exaggerated concern. "That's kind of you, but I'm managing just fine. Stephen was worried you might get lonely, rattling around in this big house all by yourself. Do you mind if I come in for a moment?" I couldn't refuse without raising suspicion, so I reluctantly led him into the kitchen. Kevin set down the casserole and immediately began scanning the room, his eyes lingering on the family photos, the medicine cabinet visible down the hall, and the stack of mail on the counter. "Stephen mentioned you've been having some memory troubles lately," Kevin said with feigned casualness. "Forgetting things, getting mixed up about appointments. That must be frightening. I don't know what Stephen has been telling you, but my memory is perfectly fine." Kevin offered a sympathetic smile. "Of course it is. Sometimes family members just worry too much. But you know, it's a good thing you have people looking out for you. Living alone at your age can be hazardous." Every word that came out of his mouth sounded like it had been scripted by Stephen. Kevin was here on a reconnaissance mission to find any shred of evidence of confusion or frailty that could be used against me later. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, playing the part of the gracious host. "That would be wonderful. You know, I was just telling Stephen how lucky Amelia is to have such a caring father. Not everyone would be so generous as to fund a European vacation. $8,000. That's incredibly thoughtful. He was fishing, trying to bait me into a conversation about my finances, hoping I might reveal some confusion or make a comment that could be twisted into evidence of poor judgment. Family is important, I stated simply. Kevin stayed for nearly an hour, peppering me with seemingly innocent questions about my daily schedule, my health, and my plans for the future. He complimented the house repeatedly, remarking on how much effort it must take to maintain such a large property. He even offered to help me organize my medicine cabinet, claiming it looked a bit disorganized. As soon as he left, I called Martin. He was conducting surveillance. Martin confirmed without a moment's hesitation. "Everything you've described, the questions about your memory, the comments about the risks of living alone, the offer to handle your medications, those are all classic information gathering techniques." He was building a profile to support a competency challenge. What should I do if he returns? Be polite, but do not volunteer any information. Do not let him into your house unsupervised, and under no circumstances should you let him near your medications or important documents. And Arthur, document everything. Write down exactly what he said, when he visited, and what he seemed most interested in. That evening, I sat in my living room with a notepad, recording every detail of Kevin's visit. As I wrote, the orchestrated nature of the encounter became crystal clear. The casserole was a pretext to gain entry. The remarks about my memory were fishing expeditions. The observations about the house being too large were designed to build a case for why I needed assisted living. Stephen and Amelia thought they were so clever, using Kevin as their operative while they enjoyed a lavish vacation on my dime. They probably imagined me sitting here, alone and vulnerable, oblivious to their espionage, and unprepared for their eventual assault. But I was not the helpless target they envisioned. Every move they made was now being documented. Every manipulative tactic was being recorded. Every piece of evidence was being carefully preserved by Martin for the legal war that was to come. They thought they were hunting a confused old man. In reality, they had stumbled into a trap set by someone who had 72 years of experience in how the world truly works. Stephen and Amelia returned from Europe on a Sunday evening, precisely 2 weeks after their departure. I had spent those 14 days fundamentally transforming my life in ways they could not possibly fathom. But when Stephen called on Monday morning, I made sure my voice conveyed nothing but the lonely, grateful father-in-law they were expecting. "Dad, Arthur, we're back. We had the most magnificent time. Paris was pure magic, and the wine tour in Tuscany was like something out of a film. We have so many photos to show you. I'm so glad you had a wonderful trip, son. I've been eager to hear all about it. We brought you some gifts, too. A beautiful silk tie from Paris and some olive oil from a small village in Italy. Can we come over this afternoon? We're dying to tell you everything." They arrived at 3 o'clock, both looking sun-kissed, relaxed, and utterly pleased with themselves. Stephen was practically glowing, dressed in new clothes they had clearly purchased on their travels. Amelia seemed happier than I had seen her in years, carrying bags filled with souvenirs and chattering excitedly about the restaurants they had tried. "Dad, this trip was exactly what we needed," Amelia said, embracing me. "We feel like ourselves again. Thank you so much for making it happen." For a fleeting moment, seeing my daughter's genuine joy, my resolve wavered. She looked so much like the little girl I had raised, full of life and excitement. But then I recalled Stephen's voice on the phone, the cruel, mocking laughter as he spoke of putting me in a home, and my determination hardened. "I'm just happy you both enjoyed it," I said, accepting their presence. The tie was lovely, undoubtedly expensive, and the olive oil came in a beautiful hand-painted bottle. For a brief second, I wondered if I had misinterpreted everything, if maybe Stephen truly did care. Then he started to speak. "You know, Dad, Arthur, Amelia and I did a lot of reflecting on this trip, about family, about the future, about what's truly best for everyone." Stephen settled onto my sofa, with the confident air of someone about to deliver wonderful news. "We realize you must get lonely in this big house all by yourself. Here we go," I thought. "And we know how challenging it must be to keep up with everything. The maintenance, the yard work, all the little things that a house demands. So, we've been looking into some options that we think would be perfect for you." Amelia chimed in, her voice adopting that careful, measured tone people use when trying to coax someone into doing something they don't want to. "Dad, there are some really lovely senior communities in the area, places where you'd have your own private apartment, but also have access to activities, social events, and even on-site medical care if you ever need it." "We were looking at some of their websites from the hotel," Stephen added. "The pictures were beautiful, like luxury cruise ships on land. They have organized activities, gourmet group meals, even transportation for shopping and appointments." I sat in silence, letting them build their case, watching the performance I had been anticipating for 2 weeks. They were so self-assured, so certain that their European holiday had bestowed upon them the moral authority to rearrange my life. "The best part is, you wouldn't have to worry about a single thing anymore," Stephen continued. "No more struggling with home repairs or worrying about your safety living alone. A professional staff would be available 24/7. It's really the responsible thing to do," Amelia added. "Your mom would want to know you're being properly cared for." Bringing Helen into it was a low blow, but I maintained a neutral expression. "These places sound expensive." Stephen and Amelia exchanged a fleeting glance, the first crack in their polished facade. "Well, yes, they do cost a bit," Stephen admitted. "But Dad, you have this large house just sitting here, and you don't really need all this space anymore. The equity from the sale could easily cover many years of care in a very high-end facility. Plus," Amelia added, "you've always said you wanted to ensure your money was used wisely. This would be an investment in your own well-being." I nodded slowly, as if I were genuinely considering their proposal. "You've obviously given this a great deal of thought." We have, Stephen said, relief washing over his face. We love you so much, and we just want what's best for you. We've even made some preliminary inquiries. Nothing formal, of course. Just to get a feel for availability and pricing. How considerate. And when were you envisioning this might happen? Well, Amelia said, shifting uncomfortably, sooner is probably better than later. These places often have waiting lists. And at your age, it's best to make the transition while you're still healthy and can adjust easily. At my age, as if 70. 2 was practically ancient, as if I had 1 foot in the grave. I see. And you've already identified specific facilities? Stephen eagerly pulled out his phone. Actually, yes. There's one called Sunny Meadows that looks perfect. It's only 20 minutes from our house, so we could visit you all the time. They have a lovely garden, a library, even an on-site barber shop. He showed me photos on his phone, generic stock images of smiling seniors in a sterile, institutional environment, the kind of place people go to wait to die. It looks very nice, I said calmly. What did you find out about the cost? About $4,000 a month for a basic apartment? Amelia replied. More if you need additional services, but the sale of the house should easily cover that for several years. $4,000 a month, $48,000 a year. In 5 years, they would have incinerated nearly $250,000 of my life savings, and I would be imprisoned in an institution I had never chosen. That does seem reasonable, I said, and watched their faces light up with triumph. So, you'll consider it? Stephen asked, leaning forward eagerly. Oh, I've done much more than consider it. I've already made my decision. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Both of them leaned in, anticipating my complete surrender. I've decided, I said, my voice steady and clear, that anyone who would conspire to put their own father in a nursing home while he is paying for their lavish European vacation is someone who doesn't deserve to inherit a single dollar from me. The silence that followed was deafening. Stephen's mouth hung open. Amelia blinked repeatedly, as if she couldn't comprehend my words. Dad, what are you talking about? She asked weakly. I reached into the drawer of the end table and retrieved a folder. It contained the printouts I had found in their guest room, along with a verbatim transcript of the phone conversation I had overheard. I had Martin's office assemble it all neatly and professionally, like evidence in a courtroom. I'm talking about this, I said, sliding the folder across the coffee table. Your husband's detailed research into nursing homes, his calculations of my net worth, his timeline for having me declared incompetent. I'm talking about the phone conversation where he laughed about putting me in a nursing home right after I paid for your trip. Stephen's face turned from white to red and back to white again. You were eavesdropping on my private conversation? You forgot to hang up the phone, I said calmly, and it ceases to be private when the topic is my life and my money. Amelia grabbed the folder and began to read, her face growing paler with each page. Stephen, what is this? These notes about Dad's assets, about guardianship proceedings. Did you really write all of this? I was just exploring options, Stephen stammered desperately. Making sure we were prepared in case your dad needed help. This isn't what it looks like. Really? I interjected. Because it looks exactly like you've been plotting to steal my life savings and warehouse me in an institution, all while pretending it's for my own good. That's not. We would never. Stephen's composure was completely gone. You said, and I quote, once he covers the cost of my vacation, I'll have him moved into a care facility. You laughed about how gullible I am. You called me the old man, and talked about how tired you were of pretending to care. Amelia looked as if she might be sick. Dad, if Stephen said those things, I had no idea. Actually, You did, I countered, pulling out another sheet of paper. According to these notes, you were already on board with the nursing home plan. You were tired of me calling every day and thought it was time I had professional supervision. The look of betrayal on Amelia's face as she realized I knew of her complicity was almost painful to witness. Almost. Dad, I never said those exact words. Perhaps not those exact words, but you agreed to the plan. You participated in it. You were willing to let your husband manipulate me into surrendering my independence so you could live comfortably on my money. Stephen suddenly found his voice again, his tone shifting from defensive to aggressive. You know what? Fine. Maybe I did say those things. But it's true, Arthur. You are getting older. You do forget things. You do need more help. We were just trying to plan for the inevitable. The inevitable, I repeated. You mean the inevitable moment when you could legally steal my money? It's not stealing if it's family money. Stephen snapped, his true colors finally showing. Amelia is your only child. That money should be ours anyway. We're just trying to make sure it's managed responsibly. Responsibly? Like how you've managed your own finances? Constantly asking for loans, living far beyond your means, and relying on me to bail you out of your poor decisions? Amelia was staring at Stephen as if she had never seen him before. Stephen, how could you say it's family money? It's Dad's money. He worked his whole life for it. He saved it. He gets to decide what happens to it. Oh, please, Stephen scoffed bitterly. Don't act like you haven't been thinking the same thing. How many times have you complained about having to visit him, about listening to the same stories over and over, about helping him with things he should be able to do himself? That's different from planning to institutionalize him against his will, is it? Because you seemed pretty interested when I mentioned how much easier our lives would be if he were somewhere safe with professional care. I watched the argument unfold with a mix of grim satisfaction and profound sadness. My daughter and son-in-law were tearing each other apart, exposing the ugly truth that lay beneath their marriage, and I was the catalyst. But I was also the intended victim. Enough, I said finally. Both of them fell silent, turning to look at me as if just remembering I was in the room. Dad? Amelia began, but I held up my hand to stop her. I want you both to leave, now. And I want you to understand something with absolute clarity. You will never receive another cent from me. You will never have access to my accounts, my home, or any decision regarding my life. If you attempt to have me declared incompetent, you will find I have taken extensive legal measures to protect myself. And if you dare to contest my will, you will discover that the vast majority of my estate is now designated for charity. Stephen's face twisted in a mask of rage. You can't do this to us. We have children, a mortgage. You can't just cut us off. Watch me, I said, rising and walking to the front door. Your financial struggles are not my responsibility. Your poor choices are not my fault. And your insatiable greed is not my problem to solve. Dad, please, Amelia said, her voice breaking. Can't we talk about this? Can't we work something out? For a moment, hearing the raw pain in my daughter's voice, I nearly faltered. But then I remembered Stephen's cruel laughter, the casual way he had discussed my disposal, the years of manipulation disguised as affection. The time for talking was before you decided to treat me like a bank account with an inconvenient old man attached, I said. Now, I believe it's time for both of you to learn what life is like when you have to stand on your own 2 feet. They left without another word. Stephen stomped to their car in a fury, while Amelia looked back at me, her face a canvas of loss and regret that might have even been genuine. But it was too late for regret. Far too late. As I watched them drive away, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced in years, complete and utter peace. The confrontation I had been dreading was over, and I had survived it. More than survived, I had won. 6 months had passed since that fateful confrontation in my living room, and my life had been transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. The house no longer felt empty, but peaceful. The silence that once felt like a heavy blanket now felt like liberation. I could wake up whenever I wanted, eat what I pleased, and watch my own television shows without anyone sighing impatiently or checking their phone. The legal safeguards Martin had erected proved to be impenetrable. 2 weeks after I had thrown them out, Stephen and Amelia had indeed attempted to challenge my competency through a lawyer. But Dr. Williams's comprehensive evaluation, coupled with the documented evidence of their manipulation, rendered their case futile. Their own lawyer had advised them to drop the matter to avoid potential criminal charges for attempted elder abuse. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that they were struggling immensely without my financial support. Amelia had been forced to take a second job, and Stephen had gone back to work full-time for the first time in over a decade. Their lavish European vacation, it turned out, had been financed with high-interest credit cards they now had no way to pay off. Without my safety net, they were finally forced to confront the consequences of their profligate spending. A small part of me felt a twinge of pity for them, especially for Amelia. But a larger, wiser part of me recognized that learning to be self-sufficient was the best thing that could ever happen to them. For too long, I had enabled their irresponsibility by always being there to clean up their messes. The doorbell chimed, pulling me from my thoughts. Through the window, I saw a woman I didn't recognize standing on my porch next to a teenage boy. As I opened the door, the boy's face broke into a wide grin. "Grandpa Arthur." It was Leo, my 16-year-old grandson. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him 8 months ago, taller, more mature, but his eyes still had the same warmth I remembered from his childhood. "Leo." I pulled him into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo, feeling the strength in his young frame. "What are you doing here?" "This is my friend's mom, Mrs. Patterson," Leo said, gesturing to the woman beside him. "She gave me a ride over because I really wanted to see you." Mrs. Patterson smiled kindly. "Leo has been talking about you constantly. He asked if I could bring him for a visit. I hope we're not intruding." "Of course not. Please, come in." As we settled in the living room, Leo looked around with wide eyes. "The house looks different, Grandpa. Brighter, somehow." He was right. I had redecorated in the months since the showdown, choosing colors that brought me joy instead of the bland, neutral tones Stephen had always insisted upon. I had hung new art, rearranged the furniture to my liking, and converted Helen's old sewing room into a workshop where I could pursue the woodworking hobbies I had long abandoned. "I've made a few changes," I said. "How are you, son? How's school?" "It's good. Really good, actually. I made the varsity soccer team, and I'm taking an AP history class that I love." Leo paused, then looked down at his hands. "Grandpa, I need to tell you something. I know what happened with Mom and Stephen." My heart sank. "Leo, you don't need to be concerned with adult problems." "No, I want to talk about it," he interrupted, looking up at me with an expression of determination that reminded me so much of Helen. "Stephen told me and Chloe that you cut them off because you were being selfish and vindictive. But Mom told me what really happened, about Stephen's plan to put you in a home, about the things he said about you." Mrs. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "Leo, maybe this isn't—" "It's all right," I assured her, then turned back to Leo. "What did your mother tell you?" "She told me about the phone call you overheard, about the research Stephen did, about how they were planning to use your money and then put you away. She cried when she told me. Grandpa, I've never seen my mom cry like that before." My throat tightened. Despite everything, the knowledge that Amelia felt genuine remorse offered a small measure of comfort. She said she went along with it because Stephen convinced her it was for your own good, but that she realized afterward how terribly wrong it was. She's been trying to figure out how to apologize to you, but she doesn't think you'll ever forgive her. And what do you think about all of this? I asked gently. Leo was quiet for a moment, choosing his words with care. I think what Stephen planned was horrible, and I think Mom should have stood up to him instead of going along with it. But I also think maybe you both made mistakes. What kind of mistakes do you think I made? I think you made it too easy for them to take advantage of you, he said with startling insight. Stephen has always been kind of manipulative, even with me and Chloe. He has ways of making you feel guilty if you don't do what he wants, but you just kept giving him what he wanted, so he kept pushing for more. The wisdom in my 16-year-old grandson's words was astonishing. He had perfectly identified the toxic dynamic that had enabled Stephen's behavior for so many years. You're very perceptive, I said. I get it from you, Leo smiled. Stephen always used to say I was too much like my grandfather for my own good. I think he meant it as an insult, but I always took it as a compliment. Mrs. Patterson spoke up gently. Leo's been having a difficult time at home since all this happened. His parents are. Well, they're struggling, fighting a lot, blaming each other. He asked if he could spend some time with you, if you'd be open to it. I would love that, I said without hesitation. But Leo, what about your parents? Won't they object? Mom said I could make my own decisions about seeing you, Stephen. Well, Stephen said a lot of things I'm not going to repeat. But I'm 16, Grandpa. I'm old enough to choose who I want in my life. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, truly talking, in a way Leo and I hadn't in years. He told me about school, his friends, his dreams for college. I told him about the woodworking class I'd started, the book club I'd joined, and the volunteer work I was doing at the animal shelter. You seem different, Grandpa, Leo observed. Stronger, I guess? More like yourself. I feel more like myself, I admitted. For a long time, I was so focused on being the perfect father and grandfather that I forgot how to just be Arthur. I like Arthur, Leo said firmly. I like him a lot. As Mrs. Patterson prepared to drive Leo home, my grandson gave me a fierce hug. Can I come visit again next weekend? Maybe I could even spend the night sometimes. I would love that. But Leo, I want you to understand something. I will always love your mother, and I hope one day we can repair our relationship. But I will never go back to the way things were. I will never again allow anyone to treat me like a bank account or a burden. I wouldn't want you to, Leo said. You deserve better than that. After they left, I sat in my workshop as the sun began to set, reflecting on the unexpected gift of my grandson's visit. Stephen had tried to isolate me, to control my relationships, just as he had controlled everything else. But Leo was old enough to see through the manipulation, and strong enough to make his own choices. The phone rang, and I saw Martin's name on the caller ID. Arthur, I have some news you might find interesting, he said. I heard through professional channels that Stephen and Amelia are getting a divorce. I wasn't entirely surprised. The immense stress of their financial woes, combined with the complete breakdown of trust, had likely made their marriage untenable. How do you feel about that? Martin asked. Sad for them, I answered honestly. Especially for the children, but not guilty. Their problems are the consequences of their own choices. That's a very healthy perspective. And Arthur, there's something else. Amelia's attorney reached out to me. She wants to know if you would be willing to meet with her, privately. She apparently wants to apologize and see if there's any possibility of rebuilding your relationship. 6 months ago, I would have said yes in a heartbeat, desperate for any chance of reconciliation with my daughter. But I had learned a great deal about myself in those 6 months, about the difference between love and enablement, between forgiveness and being a doormat. Tell her attorney that I am open to a meeting, but only under specific conditions. First, Stephen cannot be involved in any way. Second, any relationship we rebuild must be based on mutual respect, not financial dependency. And third, she needs to understand that trust, once shattered, takes a very long time to rebuild. I will relay the message, Martin said. Arthur, I have to tell you, you've become one of my favorite clients. The way you've handled this entire situation, the strength you've shown, it's truly inspiring. After we hung up, I walked through my house, turning on lamps against the encroaching darkness. Every room now reflected my choices, my tastes, my personality. The guest room that had once held the evidence of Stephen's betrayal was now a comfortable space where Leo could stay whenever he wished. Helen's sewing room had become my workshop, filled with tools and half-finished projects that brought me immense joy. I thought about the man I had been just 6 months prior. Lonely, desperate for approval, willing to sacrifice my own well-being to maintain relationships that were fundamentally one-sided. That man had been so terrified of being alone that he had allowed himself to be used and manipulated. But I had discovered that being alone was not the same as being lonely. I had friends now, real friends from my woodworking class and book club, who valued my company for who I was, not for what I could provide. I had activities that fulfilled me, hobbies that challenged me, and volunteer work that gave me a sense of purpose. Most importantly, I had myself back. The Arthur who had worked for 40 years and built a life with Helen, the Arthur who had raised a daughter and survived widowhood, the Arthur who was strong enough to stand up for himself when it mattered most. My phone buzzed with a text message from Leo. Thanks for today, Grandpa. I love you. Can't wait to see you next weekend. I smiled, typing back. I love you too, son. I'll make your favorite burgers. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man looking back at me had gray hair and wrinkles, but his eyes were bright with confidence and peace. He looked like someone who knew his own worth, someone who would never again allow others to define his value. Stephen had been wrong about so many things, but he had been right about one. I had changed. I was stronger. I was more myself than I had been in years. And I was, at long last, completely and utterly free. The cheap tie clip Stephen had given me before his trip still sat in my dresser drawer, a stark reminder of how little he had valued me. But next to it now sat a beautiful, handcrafted wooden box that Leo had made for me in his shop class, engraved with the words, "World's Best Grandpa." Some people, I had learned, were worth the investment of love. Others were worth the investment of boundaries. The wisdom was in knowing the difference. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Complete contentment. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new adventures, and new opportunities to live life entirely on my own terms. At 72, I was finally just getting started.